I would never recommend extended fasting as the primary lever you're pulling to change body composition. Extended fasting is a stressor on the body, just as being in a deficit is a stressor on the body. So I don't ever recommend people do extended fast and operate at a deficit simultaneously. And extended fasting can certainly be a tool to minimize or reduce total consumption. But their question as to, is that losing them or costing them lean tissue? In a cutting phase, primary objective is to preserve lean tissue and maximize fat loss. They would see better results by more so focusing on just that gradual reduction in total intake over time. That 36-hour span of not eating is not likely going to be optimal from a performance standpoint in the weight room. And that performance training is going to be the best thing they can do to preserve lean tissue. What is going on, y'all? Robert Sikes of the Savage Perspective Podcast. I got another AMA-style episode for you today. But instead of me just reading off both the questions and giving the responses, I figured I'd make it a little more dynamic. So I've got Greg here, who is one of our co-hosts of the Work Podcast. And he found a handful of good questions that were submitted by you, the listeners. So he's going to read those off. I'm going to do my best to offer a worthwhile response. Maybe he'll have something to add as well, and we'll just roll up our sleeves and dive in. So without further ado, Greg, how are you, sir?
I'm good. Let's rock and roll.
Rock and roll.
Okay. First question. First off, congratulations on the new baby.
Thank you.
Secondly, wanted to see your thoughts on becoming a serious athlete and becoming keto/low-carb adapted. Aside from your content and a few others like Sean Baker, Tim Noakes, Anthony Chafee, etc., everyone else seems to think you cannot perform at the same high level of an intensity without carbs. Even Thomas DeLauer agrees based on the research and his own anecdotal experience that carbs do play a role in performance and should be used as a supplement. I've also heard from Dom D'Agostino confirm the same information. In my own experience, during my workouts, I don't really feel any different at the start, but towards the end, I do notice I cannot push as hard at the same intensity. Also, immediately after the session, it feels like my blood sugar is crashing and I do crave carbs. Just wanted to see how you combat the post-exercise spike in insulin after intense exercise, and if you were trying to be a high-performing professional athlete, how would you approach your nutrition from a keto/low-carb approach? Thanks. Love the content. Hope to hear back soon.
Awesome. All right. So this one gets a lot of attention because there's not a lot of people in the ketogenic, carnivore, low-carb space that are, a lot of people in that space are doing it for weight loss or for health longevity purposes. There's not as many people putting out content around performance athletics. So I get the concern there. As far as what the research studies show, most of those research studies are done in participants that are not deeply fat adapted. They'll typically do like a 2-week, trial or a 4-week trial with a different dietary intervention, possibly a washout period, and then a different type of intervention, which from a metabolic standpoint isn't really ample time to actually get deeply fat adapted. I've always said that you got to give it at least 6 months of strict keto before you kind of make a judgment one way or the other. But even with that, it continues to get better the longer you do it. So Greg, you've been keto for over 10 years. I've been keto for over 10 years, and it just keeps getting better. And that's kind of like a cop-out answer to some, because it's like, okay, there's no hard facts here. There's no like line drawn in the sand. But if you think about it, your body is incredibly adaptable. Humans in general are incredibly adaptable. So they're going to make use of whatever it is that you're giving it. So if the primary fuel substrate you're supplying it is quality fats and proteins, your body's machinery to make the most effective use of that and efficient use of that is going to take place over a period of time. People are not typically, and they're fat adapted at birth, and then they pretty much are inundated with standard American diet foods. They spend the majority of their 20s, 30s, 40s, or however long eating carbohydrate-based diet. You can't just turn that on a dime. It takes time to get that re-engineered and back in motion. From a very tangible standpoint, you've got something called MCT transporters, monocarboxylic transporters. Those help shuttle pyruvate and lactate through the tissue. They also help shuttle ketone bodies. The more deeply adapted you are for the longer you are, the more of those MCT transporters you have in concentration throughout your tissues that allows you to shuttle those ketone bodies more effectively. That doesn't happen overnight. It takes a long time. So I've always attested to the fact that The longer you do it, the better it gets. And I've been doing this now for over a decade, as of you, and every single year it gets better and better. So I've got no reason to deviate from it. A lot of people in the space, like Thomas DeLauer, he's great. He puts out a ton of content, but he's always experimenting, doing all kinds of different things, which I certainly have respect for. But it makes it hard to like hone in on anything. It's kind of more of like a jack of all trades, master of none philosophy. One's not necessarily right or wrong. It's just, what do you want to be your truth, your story? And for me, I want to become the best ketogenic natural bodybuilder that I can be. And by being consistent with my diet throughout the longest period of time possible, the better I'm setting myself up for success in doing just that. So whether you're bodybuilding or doing strength sports or speed sports or endurance sports, you can do it. You just have to let your body have the time necessary to build up that metabolic machinery. In your question specifically, they were asking about post-exercise dip in energy due to a drop in blood sugar. What I'll typically see is like your body's ability to replenish and replace muscle glycogen once fat adapted is pretty much on par with someone consuming carbohydrates. When you are following a ketogenic or carnivore diet and not consuming exogenous carbohydrates, you still have glycogen in your muscle tissue and in your liver. And when you train, you're increasing blood glucose. So like when I'm wearing a CGM, I'll see my blood sugar shoot up to 130 or 140 even intra-workout and immediately post-training. And then about an hour or two afterwards, it kind of returns to normal. If you're starting to see that dip even below baseline numbers, then you might just want to time your pre-workout fueling a little bit differently. So what I typically do is train in the morning, and I'll have my largest, most fat and protein dense meal the evening before. That fuels my next day's workout. That's giving it plenty of time to be assimilated by my body, replenish muscle glycogen, and fuel the next morning's workout. So not sure what time this person's training, but doing that might make sense if they're training in the morning, or if they're training later in the day, having a solid fat and protein rich meal, a few hours before training should help shunt some of that blood sugar drop immediately post-exercise.
Beautiful. I was going to say, yeah, you could play with some of your nutrient timing, your meal timing, depending on when you're training.
And you could even, some people, intra-workout nutrition isn't as important with keto, but you could even do like a fast-acting fat intra-workout if you wanted to. Like when Crystal was doing her powerlifting meet, a lot of competitors are sucking down rice cakes and gummy bears and stuff like that. But we did like this. We made this cocktail for her that was MCT oil, L-carnitine, some type of stimulant, caffeine stimulant. And then we had that prior to her lifting. But that gave her a good bump in energy. The L-carnitine helped with everything. And the MCT oil obviously provided some easily digested, absorbed fats. Mm-hmm. That kept her levels more consistent too. So people could play around with that.
How about electrolytes?
Yeah, that for sure. Having those going into the workout, intra-workout, and post-training, keeping those electrolyte numbers in check. That's not really going to have that much of an effect on blood sugar necessarily, but it'll certainly help with energy throughout the workout.
Yeah, for sure. Beautiful. Next one?
What you got?
All right, next one. Very short one. This is a very common one. How to remain regular and avoid constipation on a keto diet. To what extent does fiber matter?
Well, there are definitely periods of time where I'll have absolutely zero fiber in my diet.
Yep, same.
Pretty much doing a carnivore approach, fiber being non-existent, and I am super regular. Like, not sure how deep we want to go into my bowel history here, but I'm pretty much wake up, have a cup of coffee and some water in the morning, have my morning bowel movement, and then that's my one and done for the day. And I've done that for the past 12 years now. And I'm pretty consistent with it, whether I'm eating fiber or not. So fiber is just going to add bulk to your stool. And fiber is kind of correlated to how many carbohydrates you're consuming. So if you are consuming a lot of carbohydrates that are not being fully used, it would make sense. Like your body's not going to make use of all of that. So having fiber there to push that through your system and get out of there, so it's not just getting, festered up in your intestines, makes sense. But if you're eating really bioavailable fuels, fats and proteins, animal-based especially, and you're consuming an adequate amount of food for what your energy demands require, then you're not likely going to have a lot of undigested, unused food throughout your intestinal tract. So the need for fiber to push it through is also going to be dwindling as well. So you don't have to have a lot of fiber to stay regular by any means. I mean, ask any hardcore carnivore that just eats steaks every single day, like Sean Baker. I'm sure he's happy to talk about his poop story.
I think he's actually had some posts recently, or shared some things regarding the same topic. And animal fats grease the works, and you're eating less garbage, so there's less garbage coming out.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to want to make sure you're consuming the right distribution of fats and proteins. Like, so if we take carbohydrates and fiber out of the equation entirely, if you go on either extreme of fat and protein consumption, that could have an impact on digestion and GI. So they could give you loose stool, it can give you constipation. I've got some clients that'll have, like when they're nearing their protein threshold, and our protein is pretty high relative to their dietary fat, they may be feeling more constipated, or the inverse, depending on the individual. But when that's the case, like paying attention to what that ratio is and knowing that you are operating in the extremes and adjusting accordingly makes sense. Electrolytes and hydration are key. Like if you're dehydrated, you're not going to have ample intestinal fluid to keep things moving south anyways. So making sure you're hydrated is key. And then depending on the type of electrolytes you're using, some cater more towards to GI, relief than others. So like a magnesium citrate is going to be more conducive to getting the bowels moving than like a chloride, for instance. So paying attention to that is key. And then honestly, just looking at the stool when you do have a bowel movement, like is it going to have any oily residue in there, or is it going to be hard? I mean, there's the Bristol stool chart that people can use kind of as a reference point. But all that to say, you certainly don't have to have fiber to stay regular by any means.
Yep. I remember back in the day, I was told I needed, 50 grams of fiber a day.
Yeah. And the other thing too, especially with you being in a deficit, and when I'm in a deficit with a prep, like the amount of times and the quantity of which you go reduces significantly.
Oh yeah,
too. Because if you're eating at a deficit and your body is using all that you're feeding it, it makes sense that you would have less waste as a byproduct. So, you might think that you're constipated simply because you're not going as much as you normally do. But if you've been like actively trying to reduce your intake and you're taking in less food and your body's using all of that, then you're simply going to have less waste. That doesn't necessarily mean you're constipated. Now, obviously, if you're cramping and you have GI pain and you're constipated, that's a different story. But just simply not going as frequently in the context of a deficit doesn't necessarily mean you're constipated.
True. Good point. Very good. Very good. Next one, how to follow keto/low carb for eating for endurance events like high rocks and marathon running, what to eat around training for energy and to prevent muscle cramps. Kind of ties into the first one, but in regard to like a high rocks or a marathon running, what to eat around training and preventing cramps. So
I am not an endurance athlete. I do some endurance sports, like the 50-mile march I do every year. I would consider an endurance sport. That's 22 hours straight. I ran a marathon untrained before. That would be an endurance event. The high rocks are super popular. I've got clients that are doing, ultra marathons that are obviously endurance based. And oftentimes what they find the most success with is having a easily absorbed, easily assimilated, safe meal that's not going to cause any GI distress the night prior to the event. Of high quality foods, like no carbohydrates, quality fats and proteins that your body responds well to. So don't introduce a new food. Having that with a bolus dose of fat, kind of similar to we do like with a refeed going into the show, that's going to help fill out muscle glycogen. It's going to help top out all your reserves. And because the nature of fat digests so much more slowly than a carbohydrate, that bolus dose, higher calorie meal will push into the next day's activities. So if you're doing a marathon or a high rocks event on Saturday, for instance, and you have a big bolus calorie day of fats and proteins on Friday, that food that is consumed on Friday will be assimilated and used throughout Saturday's activities. And then some people, especially doing endurance events, like they want little pick-me-ups throughout the ordeal. That isn't as critical with a ketogenic approach, because if you're consuming carbohydrates, you're going to have a lot more volatility to your blood sugar levels as your body, uses that glucose up. So that's why they'll take in the goos and the, candies bananas and things like bananas, things like that. That's not as critical when you are fat adapted, but having something that oftentimes just simply acts as a mental pick-me-up could be beneficial. So like I had a client email me, or not a client, but somebody emailed me yesterday, and they said they just got done doing, well, it was a marathon or something that they had just done, a biking event. I can't remember, but they took the keto brick and they melted it down into 100-calorie bite-sized pieces.
Sure.
That way they were easily manageable, and they would have like a little piece of keto brick every hour or 2 hour mark or something like that. That would certainly be sufficient, and that's not likely going to cause any GI distress either. Stearic acid in particular is pretty easy on the digestive tract, so that's not going to cause, loose stool mid-event. That would not be good. But the main thing I would say is being consistent with your hydration and electrolyte levels throughout the endurance event, with an occasional pick-me-up of primarily bolus dose of dietary fat, but then maybe a little bit of protein to go along with it, probably every 2 to 3 hours, as opposed to somebody consuming carbohydrates or sugars might be doing it every 30 minutes to an hour.
Gotcha.
So something like that may not be necessary, but if you're wanting to have something, or if it's an incredibly long event, having that, on 2 or 3 hour intervals would be good.
Perfect. And that also would be helpful to prevent muscle cramping.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Next one on the agenda. If you're just getting started with keto/carnivore, how do you handle sugar cravings and energy levels during the transition? Also, I do notice the lower in carbs I go, the more anxiety and stress I have, but my mental clarity increases. How long do the symptoms take to go away?
All right. So 2-part question here. As far as sugar cravings go, actually, before we even get to that, I kind of like, some people have a slow and gradual approach to transitioning from a standard American diet or a carbohydrate-based diet to a ketogenic-based diet. And like, I see the merit there, but I'm kind of more of a rip the Band-Aid off kind of guy. So I think you're just stuck in purgatory land longer if you're slowly transitioning. So I would rather just rip that Band-Aid off. Mm-hmm. If you're going to feel miserable, do so for that short period of time. Do what you can to mitigate that, and then get deeply fat adapted as quickly as possible. As you're doing so, if you have a sweet tooth and you're now removing those sugary foods, in order to bridge that gap, there's 2 trains of thought. You could either remove the desire for sugary foods entirely by not eating them, so they're not fresh on your palate. Your palate will change as well as you become more deeply fat adapted. So simply using that as a way to wipe the slate clean and kind of like go through a few days of withdrawal, so to speak, but then after you come through the other side, not have that, beholden relationship to sweet foods. Or if you still are going to have them regardless, simply swapping those out for foods that are, low glycemic in nature. Mm-hmm. So rather than having sugar, have like a, stevia sweetened or monk fruit sweetened, or erythritol or allulose, or one of the non-glycemic index inducing, sugar inducing sweetener alternatives. But there's literally a keto alternative for every single food out there. Savory foods, sweet foods, everything. I mean, like, my wife makes a freaking awesome keto cheesecake that I would put up against any other normal cheesecake.
Oh, yeah. That's good.
But like, there's that kind of stuff all over the place, like gummy bears and stuff. People love gummy bears, but you can make that with electrolytes in a gummy mold with like beef gelatin. So like, there's ways you can make it work. They're not going to be as readily available in a store, so you're going to probably be making them yourself, but that way you can ensure that it's actually got good quality stuff in it. So that's how I would contend against the sweet cravings. And then what was the second part?
Also, energy levels during the transition, and the lower I go in carbs, the more anxiety and stress I notice.
So with energy levels, a lot of people make the mistake of, they're going from standard American diet to keto. So they take out the carbohydrates, and they're under the assumption that if they're trying to lose weight, as a lot of people are, they don't need to be consuming much dietary fat if they have a lot of body fat to lose.
Right.
The problem with that way of thinking is, if you're removing the carbohydrates, which is what your current energy supply is coming from, and you don't replace it with dietary fat, your body doesn't yet know how to tap into its stored fat. So you're basically removing all energy altogether, because protein is not a great substrate for energy. So a lot of people make the mistake of not having ample dietary fat in that transitionary phase, whereas I would recommend replace the carbs with ample dietary fat. Even if you have fat to lose, give your body energy that it can, readily make use of. And then as you get more deeply adapted, you can start titrating that dietary fat down as your body's able to tap into your own stored fat more effectively. That way you're not going to be, going from higher calorie intake and dropping calories massively and not replacing that fuel substrate. And then as far as the anxiety, was it anxiety and stress?
Anxiety and stress. Yep.
So I have always struggled with pretty significant degrees of OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. And depending on what I'm doing with my diet, it oftentimes flares up or not, depending on what I'm doing. Mental clarity is obviously going to be heightened when your blood sugar levels are more stable and you've got a steady stream of energy coming in from fat. So that's a positive. But with that enhanced cognition, a lot of times people go inward with it and it becomes like this anxiety-inducing, stress-enhancing conundrum. However, what I have found is that when my ketones are actually higher, my OCD is much more reduced. And that would probably be the same case for people with, excessive anxiety or stress in general. So if you are transitioning and you are making sure to consume ample dietary fat and maybe even temporarily supplementing with exogenous ketones, like a ketone salt or a ketone ester, to make sure your circulating ketones are higher, and that may actually bode well for mitigating against that stress and anxiety.
Beautiful. Next one is a little different direction here. When cutting, what is your approach to lifting? Do you reduce intensity, add reps, focus more on cardio, etc.? I have started your book this week, so it might be in there, but it could be a good video idea. Anyways, keep up the good work.
So definitely cover that in the book. And honestly, when I'm cutting, I try to not change my training at all, really. When you are cutting, your calories are dropping. When you are in more of a deficit, your body is more prone to become catabolic. And that basically means your body is going to try and make up that void in calories and take it from your lean tissue. The best way to hedge against that is to keep that lean tissue in high demand. The best way to do that is to continue to lift hard and heavy as you have been up to that point. So honestly, I don't really change my actual training at all between a building phase or a cutting phase. It becomes harder to hit the same volume numbers and the same heavy weights on my top sets that I am in a building phase. But I try to fight for that as much as I can and continue to build, or not necessarily build. I'm not going for PRs in a cut. I just want to maintain what I've built up to that point. And again, that becomes harder. For instance, like in a building phase, I may be able to rock 405 on deadlifts for like 15 reps, pretty solid. And then when I'm in the depth of a cut, I may only be able to get 405 for like 5 reps comfortably. That's a pretty significant reduction in total volume, but I'm still hitting 405. I'm still keeping that muscle in demand. And that's going to fight to preserve that lean tissue. So the goal is no longer to hit PRs or build more muscle. It's simply to preserve what you've got. If you are able to build, that's just an added cherry on top, so to speak. But you don't want to change your training drastically. You don't want to go from, fewer reps, heavier weight to lighter weight, more reps. Like people overthink things like that. The biggest levers to pull in a cut are nutrition and then cardio as a minimum viable dose as needed when your body starts to plateau to the nutritional changes. But honestly, training itself stays pretty consistent.
Okay. Well, there's another one on here too that's very, very comparable. So let's hit that one. It just says, what is the best movement advice to keep muscle but lose body fat, cardio or strength training? And I think
definitely strength training.
Definitely pretty much answered that one. You want to keep the strength training in high demand and minimize cardio as much as you can.
Yeah, because you think about it, like your body, people get so fixated on body weight, and body weight can be a telltale sign, and it's honestly super insightful if everything else is kept in check. So like if you are consistent with your electrolytes, your nutrition, your cardio, your expenditure throughout the day, your hydration levels, if all of that is held relatively constant, and your weight starts to drop and all of your lifts are staying consistent, you can be relatively certain that you're losing body fats and you're preserving muscle. But like when all of that is thrown to the wind and you're just fixated on the scale weight, you don't know if you're losing muscle, you don't know if you're losing fat, you don't know if you're losing a combination of the two. So people get so fixated on just the scale weight. But like if you're able to hold on to as much muscle as possible and prioritize the loss of adipose tissue, then you're going to look better even at a higher weight than if you were to lose twice as much weight but lose a whole bunch of muscle in the process. And the composition should be the focus more so than the actual total scale weight.
Yep.
So yeah.
Good. My question, Robert, is regarding ketones and the importance of testing for them. Is it necessary? Provided you have implemented proper ketogenic diet protocols, is the measure of ketones in the blood vital to know? If it is, are there factors other than diet that would negatively impact these figures? Thanks very much for your kind attention.
So it's interesting. Like when I got into the space, nobody was testing ketones because those devices weren't even available way back then.
Right, they're everywhere now.
Yeah, and then like shortly thereafter, they came available. So everybody was testing ketones. Like everybody had the urine strips, everybody had the blood strips. Then like the acetone breathalyzer started coming out, and everybody was like, "All right, let's test to the hilt," and everybody fixated on it. And then a few years passed, and now it's like kind of where we're at right now. People are like, it doesn't matter at all. Don't test at all. No need to know. No benefit in knowing. Don't worry about it. And that's just true with most things. The answer lies somewhere in the middle. Like, I know how I feel. I've tested things for so long. Like, I know what signals my body's telling me. So I know roughly what my ketones and glucose are based off of how I'm feeling, whether or not I test or not. But I think throwing all caution to the wind and not caring if you're in therapeutic or ketogenic levels at all may not be the answer either. And a lot of people have tried to justify that by saying, look, the more deeply adapted you become, the less ketones will be in circulation in your blood because they're more efficiently shuttled into the cell themselves. They're not going to be in your bloodstream to be measured, which makes total sense. I can totally get behind that message. But if you are consuming, way excessive amounts of protein, and you're eating too much food in general, then your body's not likely producing very many ketones as a byproduct of fat metabolism to the extent that it could. So, you may not be feeling optimal, and you wouldn't necessarily know what your levels are. So there could be benefits to testing sporadically to like just kind of hone in and have a pulse on things. Like for instance, when I did that high fat experiment for 2 weeks, I was consuming an additional 1,000 calories, 400 grams of fat, minimal dietary protein for that short period of time, and my ketones significantly increased and my blood sugar significantly dropped. Does that mean I was any more fat adapted then than when I'm typically consuming my food? Probably. It probably means I got a little bit, deeper level of fat adaptation there. So I think having like an intervention where I throw that in every 4 to 6 to 8 weeks could be beneficial. So I think it's a tool. It's a tool just like weighing your body is, taking a body composition scan, jumping on a DEXA, getting blood work. I think you certainly don't need to be a slave to testing ketones. You certainly don't ever want to necessarily never test if you are one that likes experimenting and getting things honed in. Certainly if you're experimenting with different types of foods and different dietary protocols, I think it can be a very valuable, insightful tool. As far as what could impact those numbers outside of nutrition, stress and training certainly can. Like when I'm training, sleep for sure. When I'm stressed or sleep deprived, my ketones drop, my blood sugar increases. Immediately post-training and intra-workout, my blood sugar rises, ketones drop. And then shortly thereafter, post-training, ketones increase and blood sugar drops. But yeah, I treat it like a tool like anything else. It's just a insightful piece of information that I can glean information from and then make a more knowledgeable adjustment to going forward.
Perfect. One more on our list here. Mr. Savage, currently in a cutting phase, having significant success in 1 36-hour water fast each week. Am I sacrificing lean muscle, and should I just stick to intermittent fasting like 18-6 or 24? Cheers, Jim.
Extended fasting, water fasting. So I've always held by the belief that there is definitely a place for extended fasting. Kind of like I think there's a place for that high fat experiment that I just got done doing. I wouldn't necessarily do it. I would never recommend extended fasting as the primary lever you're pulling to change body composition. I think there's benefit to it psychologically. I think there's benefit to it emotionally with your food. I think there's benefit to it from a cellular standpoint. You can bring up all the buzzwords like autophagy and apoptosis and all that good stuff. There's certainly benefit to it. And I think it makes the most sense to do an extended fast in the context of consuming, a surplus of food as a baseline. Like if I'm in a surplus in a building phase, that's taxing on my digestive system. So, occasionally giving my body a break from that increased taxation, from that higher intake via an extended fast makes sense. But I'm not doing that for body composition changes specifically. Extended fasting is a stressor on the body, just as being in a deficit is a stressor on the body. So I don't ever recommend people do extended fast and operate at a deficit simultaneously. The total calories consumed throughout the course of a week and your average intake is important based off of your body composition goals and trajectory. And extended fasting can certainly be a tool to minimize or reduce total consumption. But their question as to, is that losing them or costing them lean tissue?
Right.
If their goal is to build and preserve lean tissue, and did they say if they were in a cut or if they were in a build?
Currently in a cutting phase.
Okay, currently in a cutting phase. Yep. So in a cutting phase, primary objective is to preserve lean tissue and maximize fat loss. So I would venture to say that they would see better results by more so focusing on just that gradual reduction in total intake over time, and they could leverage the intermittent fast and just reduce their total intake on a day-to-day basis, as opposed to having a 36-hour span throughout the course of a week where they're not eating at all, because that 36-hour span of not eating is not likely going to be optimal from a performance standpoint in the weight room, and that performance training is going to be the best thing they can do to preserve lean tissue. So like, using myself as an example, if I'm in a cut, if I'm dieting down for a show and I've got 7 days a week and I take 36 hours and fast, so a day and a half, and I know that in the context of a deficit, my following training day after that 36-hour fast is not going to be as good as it could be. You're in a deficit right now. Would you want to be on a 36-hour fast and hit heavy legs the next day?
Nope.
No.
Nope.
Now, if you were in a surplus, that probably wouldn't really phase you at all. But if you're in a deficit and you did that, your performance would be hindered. And if your performance is hindered, you're going to be at higher risk of losing lean tissue. So in that setting, I would not really optimally recommend an extended fast.
Got it.
Makes sense?
Yep. That makes sense. Those were the 8 that were chosen.
Those were the 8 that were chosen.
The magical 8.
Beautiful. Well, I appreciate you finding those, Greg. Appreciate y'all submitting those. Everybody that submitted, you got their emails and
we've got all the information they provided us. You bet.
Sweet. So we'll send all y'all some free bricks as a appreciation token for asking us these questions. Let us know in the comments if you like this format, the AMA style with Greg reading questions, me rattling off answers. Makes it a little bit more engaging than just me doing both. Appreciate you being my other half here, Greg.
You bet.
So
anytime.
Till next time, y'all. Ta-ta for now.
Ta-ta.